So here are a couple of tools that can help you repair an image that might seem like it's unusable. So sometimes when you take a photograph, especially with like a cheap digital camera, because the sky's so bright and your foreground is darker, either one is going to be overexposed and the other is going to be underexposed, right? So your sky is going to be super bright or your foreground is going to be super dark because it can't expose for both. So there is a adjustment that might help you save a file like that. So if I go to Image, Adjust, and down to Shadow Highlight. Now, if you shoot in RAW and you use Camera Raw, then you will not have to worry about this. I'm talking about an older photograph that you need to repair because it was shot before that was an option, or if you don't have a camera that shoots RAW, then this is a way you might be able to salvage that photo. So once I've opened the shadow highlights, I can come in here, and then what I can do is I can adjust the shadows and the highlights. Hey, hence the name. Keep in mind though, when you first open it, it may only show you the two sliders. If you want all the options, you check this little box right here, and that'll give you all the options. So then you can really just go through and play with these sliders so that you can adjust that shadow area. So if your foreground is too dark, you can bring up the shadow information. Or if your sky is too dark or too bright, you can darken that up. You want to be careful because if you go too far, you can start to get kind of a halo effect. So you want to be careful with that. You can also do a little bit of color adjustment here if you need to. Obviously, there's better ways we've talked about in Photoshop for that. Once you're happy with that, you say OK. The next thing is called lens correction. So I'm going to go to Image. I'm sorry, it's a Filter. Filter and lens correction. And what this allows you to do is correct for distortions from lenses, different lenses. So again, if you're depending on the camera you're using and the lens you're using, and I'm going to get away from auto and go straight to custom. So this is Winchester Cathedral, and obviously Winchester Cathedral is not like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and this tower should not be crooked, right? So because of the lens I use, the whole building is sort of leaning backwards. So we have the ability to make changes to that here on the right hand side. So the first one is going to correct for lens distortion, for like curvature of lens. That's not really what we need for this particular image, but I'll demonstrate just to show you. So if you have like a fisheye lens and you need to take that out, then you can do that in here. Or of course you can always use Photoshop for good or evil and create that stuff if you wanted. So I don't really need a lot of geometric change here, because that's not really my problem. Chromatic aberration is an interesting thing where I'm gonna zoom in a bunch here. I'm just Command plussing to zoom way in. Use my hand to take you way up to the corner here. So if you can see that around the edges of this picture and around the edges of this building, you can see where I've got sort of a cyan fringe going on here and a magenta fringe going on there. That's called chromatic aberration. And the reason that happens is when you shoot with a digital camera, there are multiple sensors in there. There's a red, green, and blue sensor in there, and it picks up, the sensor picks up for red, the sensor picks up for green, and the sensor picks up for blue. But because those sensors aren't layered on top of each other, they're kind of sitting next to each other. So sometimes on cameras that have smaller sensors, when the software sort of stacks those three things back on top of each other, they don't always line up perfectly. And that's how you get this chromatic aberration happening. So cameras with the bigger the camera chip in there, the CCD sensor inside the camera, the less you're going to see this. But I used a really cheap camera for this, and so I got a little bit of chromatic aberration here. And so you do have these sliders to adjust for that. And so I can play with those and try and get that fringe to go away. That's probably the best I'm going to get there. Vignette is sometimes when you shoot through a really long lens, you'll get like darkening at the corners like this, right? So because you're literally shooting through a tunnel of lens, and so you end up getting these really dark corners like this. So this just allows you to adjust for that if you need to. Although most photographers will tell you to darken your corners a little bit anyway, just to keep the viewer's eye more towards the center of the photo. So if you're in here, you might add a little of that if you want it. And then finally down the bottom here, this is where my issues are because my building shouldn't be leaning. And for this, I'm down the bottom, I'm going to turn on show grid just so it will help me see what's actually straight and what's not. And so I can adjust my perspective on this image to straighten up those towers. I don't really have a lot of horizontal perspective issue here. Going too far. Somewhere around there probably will do the trick. And because it is literally like stretching the edges of this photo to make this happen, I'm going to want to scale down a little bit. Otherwise you'll see that I'm losing parts of my image. Okay, and then we'll go back and use the crop tool to fix that outer edge when we're done here. So it's pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then like I said, out here in the main Photoshop, I can go and use my crop tool now and just crop this back to a regular shape. And there you have it. So shadow highlight and lens correction, two things that might save a photo for you.